Hello and welcome to our training segment for Airport Rescue Firefighters. Today we're going to be talking about general aviation aircraft in the Cessna Skyhawk 172, a very common aircraft at most airports. We're going to be using a simulator today to use as a visualization model as we kind of go over a couple key subjects. We want to specifically talk about this aircraft since it is so common at most airports. We're also going to talk about a couple basics of flight in general. So this is a really great starter aviation familiarization course for firefighters. So this is for safety personnel that work at airfields, or possibly those rescue teams that are near airfield or are in the response area where maybe there's a air traffic line over a large jurisdiction. So we need to have an understanding of aircraft just in case we do get called on an emergency for one. So they don't only happen at airfields, even though the majority of aircraft incidences do take off during takeoff and landing, and usually in close vicinity to airfields themselves. But then again, a lot of things can happen. Someone runs out of fuel out in the middle of a large swath of land. There could be different response agencies. So it's a really good thing for first responders to have a understanding of aircraft and some safety and hazards and kind of some basic functions with that as well. Okay, so back to the one that we have here. So here we go. We got our Cessna 172, very common, usually used for, they can be a rental aircraft. They're usually they're on the cheaper side of aircraft that can actually be purchased by private pilots. Student pilots love them, and they're great for student pilots just because they're very stable, they're not too fast, and they just get the basics of flight down really well inside of it without the same perceived risks of speed or instability, right? So kind of going over some basics of aircraft design here is what we have is our main fuselage, which is the main body of the aircraft, right? That would contain the cabin, the cowlings for the engine, the tail section, and of course further down on the fuselage then we have vertical stabilizer. Here you see the individual control surfaces here. So here's the rudder, the elevator, we got flaps here, we got ailerons out here on the outer part of the wing, and each one of those control surfaces have a very specific role in how they help the aircraft navigate three-dimensional space. Like I said, this video is gonna touch on a lot of basics, so bear with me. Of course, at the front, of course, big spinning prop, right, tied to an engine. That's what makes the aircraft go, right? So we're just gonna keep moving on ahead here. So a couple things of note to point out right away that we'd probably notice is we see these little red bits up here. That is where the aircraft is refueled. So those are the fuel caps for the aircraft, and that is actually pretty important for us to know as firefighters, is because that is where the fuel tanks in this aircraft are located. So the fuel tanks are beneath the skin of the wings. They come back, I believe, to about here, if I remember right, on either side. Each aircraft is going to have about 56 gallons of 100 low lead gasoline, but that is by default is 100 low lead. There are some modifications in the Skyhawk line where they have put turboprops on them, where you might actually see jet fuel in them. It's pretty rare, but I've seen it happen. But it's on this majority of the time you're going to be dealing with 100 low lead fuel, which is similar to the gasoline that's in your car with a little bit of octane in it, right? So that's going to be the fuel type that we're worried about. And that's important to note, just because we know that we only have about 56 gallons max. That's what we're going to assume. But that means that fuel is more volatile than jet fuel, since it can light, to lower heat sources like open flame, to where you could have a significant spillage and fire on your hands with a pretty large volume, larger than your car, right? About twice as much fuel as what you would see in the standard gas tank of the car. So talking more about wings, an important thing to note is what actually makes aircraft fly and what keeps them in the air. Because we talked about fuels, and we got an engine on the front, but I don't think the engine is really doing all of the work. So if we look at our wing here, wings are usually positioned just very close to the center of gravity of the aircraft. And I can actually bring up a diagram here really quick to kind of help us visualize a concept. So what we have, and what you see on the screen here, is just a diagram of lift and a wing viewed from the side like I'm showing you here. Okay, so we can see that on the top we have a bevel on the wing here, and on the bottom we might have a little bit lighter of a bevel on the bottom. So the way that the air traveling over the top of the wing is going to have to go over a larger surface, where the air on the bottom, you can see that the arrows are straight, so they're actually going on a straighter surface. So that actually means that the pressure, or the amount of molecules that are contained below the wing, right, is higher than the ones that are stretched a little thin going over the top of the wing here. And you can see they changed the angle of attack here on this wing up a little bit. So you can see that generates lift because the pressure change. Okay, so that's what generates lift in an aircraft, and that's the reason why they go up. The more that we take this, you straighten this out, you straighten out the angle of attack, and then you make the wing, the bevel on the top about the same as the bottom, then you start having a little bit more like a stabilizer rather than a wing. And that's what we see in much faster aircraft, where it relies far more on the engine itself in order to maintain lift, in order for the aircraft to stay airborne, than other aircraft like these that are actually rely on the wing, would actually generate some lift, but we do still need a force forward pulling us forward, and that's why we got our prop, right? So interesting things to note too is that you've probably heard about aircraft stalling, and stalling is has to do with when that lift kind of dynamic is interrupted either by low speed or turbulent forces here, and I can bring up another diagram for us to see. So with that low angle attack wing we see up here, this is actually going over the top of the wing and the bottom, and they're nice and flat on the bottom, higher pressure on the bottom, generating lift. It is doing just fine. We're getting significant lift off of this wing here at the top. You can see that as we actually go to a higher angle attack, which is where aircraft be gaining altitude, right, we start to see a little bit of disruption into the airflow over the wing, which, as long as we have enough power to keep us moving forward, it doesn't really end up being too much trouble, and we can still generate quite a bit of lift, and we're going to gain some altitude. But when our angle of attack is in excess for the speed that we're actually going, then we start seeing some trouble here, is where the airflow on the bottom, see how it smooths out, and then we start getting these little currents in the top of the wing, and those currents destroy the wing's ability to generate lift, right? So if we destroy the wing's ability to generate lift, then we will start falling like a rock. So that is what stalling is. There's, as far as what happens to the aircraft after stalling occurs, then that kind of ties into what's gonna, what type of stall. Like you probably heard things like a leaf stall or things like that. Then those different, the different types kind of come to play with what exactly happens to the aircraft after a stall does occur. So that's why they have to maintain a significant enough speed to maintain lift on the wing to prevent those venturis from happening in the most kind of basic sense there. Okay, so that's the basics of how wing works, and that's what actually generates lift for the aircraft. And if we're going to continue down here, now we want to talk a little bit about some control surfaces, right? So with the control surfaces that we have on the aircraft here, starting with the main wing, these outer guys on the very end here, these are known as ailerons, right? They control the roll of the aircraft, or when it rolls left to right, almost in a circular pattern around the center of the aircraft here. And one will pitch up, one will pitch down, and then it'll actually push against that, and then it'll roll the aircraft in that direction. This inner one here, these are known as the flaps, right? So the flaps can, what they do is they actually notch downward, and as they notch downward, they kind of capture the current of air in here, and they create a cushion underneath the wing itself in order to increase lift for lower speeds. So when we want to generate a significant amount of lift at low speeds as we're being pushed forward, then the flaps themselves will be lowered so that way we can land at lower speeds. So flaps are an important thing for a lot of aircraft. Not all aircraft have flaps. I mean, you might see the larger, older aircraft like DC-10s, like those old warplanes. Some of those didn't have flaps because their cruise speed was able to maintain lift at a low enough speed for them to land. So it was not really a problem there. So of course, faster aircraft, larger, heavier aircraft, you're going to rely a lot on flaps when we're landing. So, cruising on back here, we see these are the elevators. So we have kind of this rear horizontal stabilizer in this area, and we see we have our elevator here. It's called the elevator because, of course, it changes our angle of attack and then changes our pitch, right? So our nose will actually, if this were to move up, then it would actually, the airflow flowing over it would push down on it, right? And then our nose would pitch up, so it would change our pitch and our angle of attack that we saw in the wing diagram earlier. And then here at the back, another control surface here. This is the rudder. Rudder is basically our yaw, so it's going to make our nose kind of swing to the left, swing to the right, and it's usually used in combination with ailerons during a turn. Another interesting fact to note is that your rudder is actually going to be tied to your nose gear, so you're going to see that the rudder pedals, which are actually at the pilot's feet, are what he uses in order to drive like a car when he's on the ground, right, as he's taxiing. And is also going to be moving his rudder at the same time. A few more things to kind of talk about. It's more anatomy of an aircraft, as we actually see here. See this extra little here? There's a trim tab. This extra little plate here that has that can actually be pitched up and down in notches. So a pilot, as he's going through, if he wants to maintain a certain direction or just keep the nose pointing in a certain way, he can actually trim out his control surfaces in order to hold there, because they usually hold in position. And I'll show you that inside the cockpit here in a minute. And actually hold that where he can maybe put just a little bit of yaw on a rudder in order to counteract maybe some engine torque, in order so his flight stays stable, or he wants to trim it out so that we just has a little bit of upward nose pitch, so he can trim out his elevator and have it hold there. It's kind of like a really simple cruise control if you think about it that way. Most flaps don't typically have, because they're already notched into place, they don't really have trim tabs, I don't believe. Ailerons can. I've seen one on some aircraft. I don't think this one has it, but elevators and rudders usually do. I usually see them. Okay. So if you look at the outside of the aircraft, we do want to talk about some hazards real quick for responders. There is a very obvious hazard here in the front to do with the prop, right? Aircraft do have parking brakes, and when props are going, it's like the pilot may or may not have the parking brake engaged. And the problem with props is that they do have a hypnotic effect to them, which means that if you're steering head on to a prop and you're kind of walking forward, it could be difficult for your body to really judge movement or location while we're kind of working around props. They don't make, depending on what position you are in accordance to the prop, it may make a lot of noise, or it may make next to none. So it's kind of funky how that actually works. So you could accidentally stumble into a prop. It can be disorientating. So it's best to avoid everything forward of the wing here when that is running. So if for some reason you have an in-flight, maybe a guy had like a cardiac issue and we're stuck on the runway, we have to get in there, but the prop is still going, I would definitely do an approach from the rear. I would come in from this direction here and just come into it like a car door. Just important to note that I would, as that prop is running, just completely avoid running props. Okay, it's just safe, especially when you have your gear on. It can get disorientating, and it's kind of hard it can be difficult to avoid. So, highly recommend it. Anyway, so Another thing, let's say that we do have to get into and get to a pilot that's inside of an aircraft here. Say that whether this is for the sake of discussion, just say that the prop wasn't running, and this was a collision, and we had to get into there and actually get to the pilot. Well, this front window here is actually a kind of plexiglass, kind of a glass plastic composite window. That is very thick. It's designed to withstand a lot of force from forward wind, and given that it's a composite kind of plastic in there, that if you use a large saw to try to cut through it, you're probably just going to turn the saw into a bunch. It's just going to make a mess. It's just going to be little melted plastic ribbons are going to shoot everywhere. It's going to be very difficult, and probably not the first option that I would do to try to get a pilot out of a plane if he can't self-egress, right? So most likely what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the doors. Now the doors are pretty neat because you can see they have a little pull tab on them, so they kind of open similar to like what a car door would do. But what's holding that door on there is just this one tiny little pin, right? So there's one pin there, right? So if you just do a little zip on those pins, if you needed to, and if you can just get this door, if you had to literally take the door out, that's how I would do it. Otherwise, just try before we pry. Try the door handle. If it opens, it opens, and then maybe that's all you need to do. But the doors are not nearly as difficult as you would think to get off. These side windows here are much thinner type material, glass or plastic. If you had to go through a window. Same as here. Rear window too, you can see the little cargo section here in the back, and a little bit thicker glass though in the back as well, probably in the void zone. But these windows here are usually going to go-tos, but likely you're going to want to go through the door. Okay, so all right, so I can't open the door on this model, but let's go ahead and hop inside, right? So pilot's kind of disappeared. Now we're in the back seat. Sound looks a little bit better. There we are. We're inside the aircraft. Okay, and we are looking out. So let's look at how many seats we have here. We have pilot, co-pilot, and we do have 2 people that we can stick in the back. That's really about it for a 172. You might have some luggage here towards the back. That's kind of it as far as it's like a little car. It's a little more cramped than a car actually once you're sitting inside of one. So moving forward here, you can see now we have a more modern dash in this guy. We got some Garmin displays, but the basic functionality of all this stuff is pretty much the same. When I'm looking at where the pilot's sitting, say I did have to get that guy out of this, and I would just open that door right there, seat belts are very similar to the seat belts in cars because they're low speed. Down here underneath, you can actually see that there is just a pull tab in order for us to move the seats forward or back, right? And they can slide along those rails similar to the ones inside of a car. So as far as manipulating the seats themselves, they can recline too, probably not as much as a car, but you can, if you had to recline it a bit to get the guy out, that is an option. So what I would do is I would just slide that seat back, recline it a bit, get a seat belt out, and then extricate your pilot. So getting back here, let's talk about the dash itself, right? So, you know what? Actually, we're about to get to that. There's one more thing that I want to talk to you about, and that's if we did have to make any cuts. Now, if for a lot of firefighters, we think about cars, right? But we think about ABC posts, okay? So you got A post, you got a B post here, little C post there in the back, and we're saying like, oh, if I have to get someone out, I'm just going to extricate them, cut those posts, peel that top back, and then, if it was a difficult or a higher impact crash, maybe that's something that I have to do. But I do want to caution you is because some of these posts actually have fuel lines inside of them. So I actually have a diagram here that we can use to show that. So if we look at the Cessna 172, we can see that we do have fuel lines. Look right here. You got one going through what looks like a post right there. And then we actually have fuel vent lines here. So we could have fuel lines inside of those posts when we are, that we could be cutting through. So with caution, if you had to go through those, I would probably skip the saw. I would probably go for something more like an air chisel if I had to get through those posts, right? And I would have extinguishing agent on hand in case things go south. Because remember, we have the fuel lines are up in the top, fuel vents there on the lower side of the wing. Fuel is a problem because it has to get down to the engine, and like I said, it is a more volatile fuel than what you see with jet fuel, which is more similar to diesel fuel. This is a highly volatile fuel, either sparks or anything like that. And as soon as you cut those, then you could have 56 gallons then coming out. So just a word of caution though when we're talking about cutting posts to get pilots out. So anyway, really basic kind of layout for the outside of it if you have to get in to there. Another little cautionary thing too, there are some aftermarket, I know you guys have probably heard about some Cirrus aircraft, things like that, having parachutes in them. Okay, well there's aftermarket parachutes that sometimes can be purchased by pilots and in 172s, and they would actually be most likely visible by the rear window. They'd probably be back in this area here. It's like an aftermarket safety last minute chute that they can actually pull in order to basically drop the aircraft back to Earth. So alright, so now we're in the front here. We're kind of sitting as if we're in the pilot seat. Okay, let's start talking about some of the things that we have here. So here we go, we got our yokes, right? These are, of course, what we use to manipulate the aircraft, left, right, or we're going to pitch. So we pull back on it and we actually get nose up, push down, push forward, nose down, right, roll left, roll right, and you can see there's the rudder pedals down there at the bottom. Okay, so starting from this area here, this is the parking brake, right? Parking brakes function by just you twist it and then push it. So, and then that's what we take the parking brake off. Actually, I'm going to hop into the cockpit here so we can actually manipulate some of these things. Okay, so parking brake like that. There you go, parking brake on, and then I can't get to it. Well, if I couldn't grab it. Okay, never mind. So parking brake's off. So with the parking brake on, you would just pull it back. But to turn it off, you push it forward, you twist it, push it forward. Okay. So up here on the left-hand side, now look, this is our alternator and battery, right? Avionics master and avionics master. Okay. So our battery is going to then get us electricity to the aircraft and start firing everything up. Okay. So then we're going to do the alternator right now. Don't have the engine running, so probably not going to do anything. Avionics master then, those two are going to put the avionics systems online, so that way we can actually, that they would use for navigation. Okay, so down over here, this is our throttle, and this is our mixture, right? It's kind of changing the ratio of air to fuel, right? So over here is our throttle, and you can see throttles are push to full, pull to off. Okay, so that's important for us to know because we want to cut off fuel to engines that we're shutting off, right, in order to make aircraft more safe. There's also down here is important, there's a fuel selector that we want to set. It sets which one is the active fuel tank that it's actually pulling fuel from. This one down here, I don't believe this can shut it off, but we can shut the fuel valve off. So this little fuel valve here can actually shut off the flow of fuel. So let's go ahead and test this. So let's take our throttle. We're going to run her back, right? Maybe a little bit. Okay, give it a little bit of throttle. And we're going to come over to the magneto, right? And we're going to right, left mag, and then just like the key in your car, we're going to start. There we go.
Ground, Cessna Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra Alpha requesting pushback. Cessna Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra
Okay, and you can see that the AI of this is then trying to request pushback from a guy in a props running. So that part's not very accurate, right? So I probably want to do a pushback in an aircraft with a running prop, but just heads up. So going back here, so I am fired up, prop running, engine, alternator, all this stuff, avionics is ready to go. So let's say now we have this fuel valve down here. So I pull that, look at that, kills the just before it got that guy, so it cuts the flow of fuel. So if I were in an aircraft or a Cessna, if I had to shut down a Cessna 172, then the way that I would do it is I would come in, I would reach over the pilot, I would turn the magneto off, I would just turn it all the way to the left, I'd cut the fuel, I'd pull the throttle, and I'd shut off the power. Okay, so that's what we do to shut down a Cessna 172. And that's just very simple. Once you understand the kind of functions of stuff. Oh, needs fuel, right? There we go. Again, shutting it down, magneto left, just take this key, turn all the way to the left, cut the fuel, shut off the power, and then pull the throttle back. Okay, just good practice to pull that throttle back. We cut off the flow of fuel, so the throttle doesn't really mean a whole lot after that, but it is just good practice in order for us to just pull those throttles back. Okay, I don't know where this guy is pushing us. It is very strange. Anyway, so let's go ahead and finish up on the outside of the aircraft here. And there we go. Our guy's just kind of pushing our aircraft off into the dirt, because why not, right? That's University Road there, and that's where he's sticking us. Okay, well anyway, besides that last little strange bit, we just went over Cessna Skyhawk 172, a very common GA aircraft that is most likely common as your airfield too. So anyway, that's the first video of our I don't know what this guy is doing. Anyway, so yep, that's our first aviation video. So without any further ado, just gonna go ahead and shut this down. Stay tuned for the next one. We're just gonna probably look at some more complex aircraft, probably some aircraft from some more aircraft familiarization, probably some airfield familiarization, and different things like that. Okay, all right, fly safe.